In 1775, the shot heard round the world at Lexington and Concord sparked a revolution, uniting 13 colonies and forging a continental army from farmers and frontiersmen. Against the odds, they turned the tide at Trenton and Saratoga, survived Valley Forge, and at Yorktown forced a British surrender, securing independence and giving birth to the United States of America. Before radios and field phones, sound was the signal. In the Continental Army, fifes and drums carried commands across the chaos of battle, telling soldiers when to advance, when to retreat, eat, even when to rest. That legacy actually lives on today with the U.S. Army Fife and Drum Corps, part of the 3rd Infantry Regiment known as the Old Guard. Founded back in 1960, they're the only unit of their kind in the armed forces. Performing in uniforms patterned after those worn by General Washington's musicians. Playing period instruments with patriotic precision, they bring history to life, sharing the sound and spirit of the Revolution through more than 500 performances each year, both at home and around the world, too. The Old Guard, Fife and Drum Corps, everybody! Fort Sumter in 1861, a nation divided. Over 4 brutal years, nearly 2 million soldiers fought to preserve the Union. Among them, 5 future presidents and the first recipients of a brand new military decoration, the Medal of Honor. With independence won, our nation's westward expansion began. The Army moved in step, guarding settlers as native scouts lit the way. Immigrants joined the cause, and the Buffalo Soldiers etched a legacy of grit and honor across the American frontier. As they march by, a soldier's uniform signals their duty, their role, and their readiness. And by the late 1850s, official regulations outlined distinct looks, shaping the Army's identity and function across the force. Soldiers were issued 2 coats. One, a short sack coat for work and battle, with brass buttons and colored trim that marked their rank. Well, by war's end, that rugged sack coat became the soldier's uniform of choice. In 1914, years of escalating competition between European alliances culminate in the outbreak of the First World War. The two sides engage in the savage war of attrition, defined by opposing trenches, barbed wire, poison gas, and mass casualties. The United States initially maintained its neutrality, but was eventually drawn into the conflict in 1917. Despite having less than 130,000 soldiers at the beginning, the Army eventually grew to over 4 million, with nearly 2 million soldiers serving in Europe. In 6 months of fighting, nearly 50,000 Americans lost their lives, with another 190,000 wounded. The guns fell silent with the armistice of November 11, 1918. Representing the World War I era is the 82nd Airborne Division, based out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You'll notice the unit is wearing replica World War I uniforms signifying the soldiers who served our nation during this time. When the Americans entered the Great War, our soldiers, under the command of General Blackjack Pershing, hit the trenches in the new standard. It was the olive drab winter service uniform. Now on their heads you'll see a steel helmet with sand-textured paint built to deflect deadly shrapnel from above. Not bulletproof, but battle tough. Nicknamed the Pershing boot, on their feet was the M918, 1918 French boot. It was designed to survive the brutal grind of trench warfare. And on their backs, the field pack, rations, ammo, first aid, and a gas mask. Everything a doughboy needed to fight and to win. World War II, a global fight for freedom. In history's darkest hour, the United States Army was on the front lines. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, the greatest generation faced down tyranny and turned the tide. In a global fight like World War II, the U.S. Army knew our troops needed more than courage. They needed innovation. Uniforms evolved for every environment, but olive drab remained the mark of the American soldier. Shaped by lessons from the trenches of World War I, the Army introduced 2 battlefield essentials: the M1 helmet, tough, stable, and built to protect under fire, and the M1 Garand rifle, powerful and fast. It gave American troops a very clear edge. General George S. Patton called the M1 rifle the greatest battle implement ever designed, and history proved him right. The Korean War, often referred to as the Forgotten War, began on June 25, 1950, with the North Korean Army's invasion of South Korea. A coalition of South Korea, the United States, and other United Nations members defeated the invasion and advanced into North Korea. the coalition fought and defeated 2 Chinese offensives in the spring of 1951. Armistice negotiations began shortly after that defeat in July of 1951 until the armistice was signed 2 years later in 1953. Combat consisted of small attacks, raids, and patrolling. During this war, the United States deployed approximately 6.8 million military forces to the Korean Peninsula. In the jungles of Vietnam, the U.S. Army faced a new kind of war. Helicopters became the new workhorses of battle, delivering troops, firepower, and supplies into some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. This is the U.S. Army in Vietnam, the era of air mobility, fierce firefights, and unwavering brotherhood. The U.S. Army deployed large numbers of troops in support of the Vietnam War. The first contingent of U.S. Army advisors arrived in Vietnam in the late 1950s, and that quickly grew to a small team of around 100 soldiers, which then expanded to more than 600 over the next decade. As the war intensified, troops' numbers quickly grew as the war between the South Vietnamese government and the communist insurgents supported by North Vietnam intensified. By January 1969, more than 364,200 soldiers organized around 7 divisions and 20 separate combat brigades. The United States began withdrawing its forces in July of 1969, and the last Army combat unit left South Vietnam in August of '71. The last U.S. combat soldier came home March 1973, while a small number of non-combat personnel remained until April 1975. When Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990, the U.S. Army deployed to Saudi Arabia to deter further Iraqi aggression in the region for what was known as Operation Desert Shield. By the fall, more than 750,000 troops comprising U.S. service members and coalition partners from more than 30 countries had assembled in the Saudi Arabian desert. In mid-January 1991, the U.S.-led coalition began Operation Desert Storm, which kicked off with an intensive air campaign designed to knock out key Iraqi infrastructure and weaken Iraqi forces. The ground offensive was launched in early 1991, where military forces overwhelmingly destroyed enemy tanks and vehicles. After only 100 hours of ground combat, coalition troops liberated Kuwait, and the Gulf War ended with Iraq's surrender. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Rangers were called upon to lead the way in the global war on terrorism.